What's going on, my dudes? Today I'm going to be showing you an easy way to remove the flywheel on pretty much any car, but this is specifically on the 350Z, so let's get to it. Alright, so I have my engine out. Yours will probably still be in the car, but this still applies. So after you've taken the transmission off, if you try removing these bolts in the flywheel, it's just gonna spin around because there's nothing stopping it from spinning. This method will work for both the clutch and the flywheel, getting them off, because they're both gonna spin whenever you try to take the bolts out. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is put one of the transmission bolts back in, and then you're gonna wanna get a wrench that fits over the bolt pretty well. And then what I like to do is take a bolt and put it to the other side, tighten it just a little bit. That way when you start trying to loosen these bolts, this wrench will keep it from spinning. This will work the same if the clutch is still on. You'll just attach this part of the wrench, the box end of the wrench, to the bolt, and then again put the wrench against this bolt and just try not to knock this wrench off, and then you'll untighten them. So let's get these bolts untightened and then we'll get the flywheel off. If you're doing this on a 350Z, the torque socket you need is a T55. If you use anything different, it'll probably strip these bolts and you'll have a real hard time getting them off. And you'll want to just go smooth and steady with this because these are pretty sensitive bolts. You don't want to strip anything. Be careful when taking that flywheel off. It's pretty damn heavy, and it's also really sharp on the edges, so you don't want to drop it on yourself. You'll have to wiggle it a little bit back and forth to get it off, but there you go, that's how you get a flywheel off. And now we're going to take out this little pilot bearing. So in order to get this pilot bearing out, I rented this little pilot bearing tool from AutoZone. I didn't really want to go through the mess of doing the grease and bread method. If you need to look that up, it's pretty easy. All you do is just stuff some grease in here, put a little bit of bread, and keep stuffing grease and bread. And you take a clutch alignment tool and you hammer it until the pressure pushes this bearing out. But with this tool, all you do is put it inside here. It looks like I might have to do the grease and bread method because this is not mine, so I can't shave these down, and it's a little bit too big to fit in here. So what I'm gonna have to do is do the grease and bread method. So we're gonna stuff some grease in here. I'm gonna try it with just grease so far, see if that works, and we'll go from there. So I had an old clutch alignment tool, and you could just pull this little ring off. So I did that way I could use a hammer on this. So once we get some grease stuffed in there, we'll just tap it with the hammer and try to force this out. I don't have a grease gun, so I'm just gonna be stuffing some grease in by hand. This is probably gonna be pretty messy. Alright, so the grease doesn't seem to be working by itself, so we got our trusty bread here. So what we're going to do is stuff a little bit of that in there, stuff some more grease in it, and a little bit more bread. Then take our clutch alignment tool, hammer it in there. Alright, so the bread and grease method was not working out too well for me. So I just modified this pilot bearing puller a little bit so that it would go in here, so now it fits perfect. And now we're gonna take the slide hammer and we're gonna pop this baby out. Pop it out. There we go, now we got it out. No big deal. If I were you, if you're in a pinch, you could maybe just mess with the bread and grease method for a while, but it was taking way too long for me and not really working out too well. So I would just rent one of these from AutoZone. Took me like 5 seconds and now it's out. Now we just got to put the other one in and we're good to go. Alright guys, so I personally would not recommend the bread and grease. Made a huge freaking mess that now I gotta clean up. So I'm gonna take some brake cleaner and get all this grease and bread out of here, and then we'll get to putting the new bearing in. Alright, so now that I got everything cleaned up with some brake cleaner, that's the only thing that'll really take all this grease off and not leave anything behind. I'm going to take this new pilot bearing and we're going to press it in this hole. I'm going to put a little bit of grease around it so it slides in a bit easier.
That's what she said!
Just the tiniest bit, you don't want to overdo it. And then when you're hitting this bearing in, you're going to want to make sure it's as even as possible. I'm going to start it with the hammer with just some little taps, and then I'm going to finish hitting it in with like a socket that's about the same size. You'll definitely want to make sure it's even, that way it doesn't get lodged in the side. Alright, so I got a few hits in there, used a few different sockets, got it seated in again. So now we could go ahead and put the flywheel back on and then mount the clutch. Alright, so I'm going to put some gloves on while doing the flywheel because I don't want any grease or anything touching the flywheel, or else it will not work very well with the clutch. It'll get on the clutch and then you'll get slipping and all kinds of stuff like that. Also, when you're putting the flywheel on, you gotta mind this cam position pin. There's a hole on the back of the flywheel that lines up to it. It's a pretty distinct hole. It's hard to miss. If you don't line that pin up correctly, your car won't start or it'll run really bad. So make sure you take note of where that pin goes on the back of the flywheel. It's pretty obvious. So now we're going to put the bolts back in. We're going to use some blue thread locker, that way they don't come loose. And we're going to torque them to the required torque specs. Now I'm going to start torquing them down in a star pattern. The torque specs on this are 62 to 68, so I'm going to go with 68. And make sure you go in a star pattern, that way the flywheel is evenly placed on here. And again, you're going to have to use the bolt method with the wrench and the bolt. Alright, now I'm going to take my clutch and my pressure plate that I got from Z1 Motorsports. It's an Exody clutch and a pressure plate, and we're going to put it on. The first thing you're going to do is put the clutch on with this alignment tool. That way it holds the clutch on, and then you'll put the pressure plate over that. So what you're going to do is you're going to stick this clutch alignment tool in the clutch, stick it onto the pilot bearing, and then you'll take your pressure plate and then put it over that. And then last, you'll take your flywheel bolts and bolt it up. So again, I'm going to put some thread locker on these and then do them hand tight, and then I'll go back through and torque them. Make sure that they have this little washer on it too. So these bolts are all 12 millimeters. So again, you're going to torque them in a star pattern, alternating from one to the other. That way you get even distribution on the pressure plate. And the torque specs in my Haynes manual to these are 29 foot-pounds. Alright guys, so that's how you replace a clutch. Sorry I couldn't show you the transmission because the engine was already out. But the next video will be us replacing the engine into the Z and hopefully starting it up. So if you guys want to catch that, subscribe to the channel, like this video if you liked it, like it if you didn't, dislike it if you didn't, and we'll catch you guys later. Have a good one. You got